Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
Hello, we're back in our studio. We're trying to get over some problems, but
yeah, a little bit here and a little bit there.
Yeah, we've had some setbacks.
But we're not going to give up.
No.
You know, we talk about our studio because we want to distract them a little bit about our imperfections.
Yeah,
but we're going to have a better studio, and we're going to work on our. If I know about mine, I don't know about yours, but I keep working on my imperfections. Because people want to get the information, and we like to dig it out, and then every once in a while we have an opinion about it. But we have a goal, I know that. The goal is easily agreed to, and I imagine most of our viewers have a similar goal of living in a free society rather than a totalitarian society like we have today. And that's what we're going to start off with, some of the nonsense that goes on. But this comes from Responsible Statecraft. And the article is Why the War Party is the Real Winner in the Midterms.
Yeah.
And my title for this is, And the Winner is the War Parties.
Exactly.
But who is the War Party? It just fits in to my compulsion to talk about there is no two-party system. I'm waiting for the second party before we get into the third party. And so there's a lot of bipartisanship going on, but the people can get fooled. Not the people who watch our program. They're not fooled, but there's a lot of people out there that think that, it's this antagonism and the fighting, like, the end of the world will come unless we can get the leadership of these two parties to come together. And I agree. But what this article does, it points out, well, it's pretty well greased for bipartisanship, and this has to do with, it doesn't matter much on who's in the leadership, that the Republicans are taking over. If you're interested in peace, if you're interested in the spending, if you're interested in the Constitution, all these things are a threat to liberty, and it's happened throughout all of history. This is where the liberty is stolen from the people. It's over scare the people to death. There's going to be an invasion. There's an enemy out there. And now it doesn't just exist that we have to worry about the Russians are coming or something like that. We have to get the medical profession as part of the enemy. So they go into COVID as this vicious enemy and scare the people. But in this article, though, makes the point that, and they have the evidence for the people who are going to be there protecting the military-industrial complex. And we, of course, have talked a whole lot about the military-industrial complex, but it really is evil, because when you think about what they do, money's a big deal. I mean, they get away with all the money in the world. Then they get away with passing the money out to our members of the empire, and that's a lot. But that's all for our national security purpose, to protect our Constitution and protect our liberties. I never understood why people buy into that. I don't think people going over and getting blown up or going broke, going into a place like Ukraine or the Middle East or Vietnam, gives us more freedom. It certainly makes us poorer, but it doesn't give us more freedom. For the most part, during war, you get less freedom, and that is the reason this is a big issue, and it also works into the concern we have about how do they pay for it? How long can the people be taxed for it? Well, you have to hide, cheat, and steal, and you steal the wealth through a fraudulent monetary system. Just print the money, which is a limited time for that, because that's what we're seeing, the limitation of how long you can just print the money and the people won't wake up. They're waking up, but they have a lot more understanding to gain in order to understand exactly why complaining about the military budget has something to do why the cost of living goes up.
Yeah, and well, we have had some inroads of conservative war skeptics, and that's something to be positive about. People like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, I think is really coming to her own. She said, not another penny for Ukraine unless it's all accounted for. And there are others. J.D. Vance is coming in. He's been skeptical. Nevertheless, we have to look at this article by Connor Echols in Responsible Statecraft. We can actually put that up. This can be found on antiwar.com today. But why the war party is the real winner, as you point out, Dr. Paul. And here is Connor's evidence, and it's pretty strong evidence. If we can go to that next clip. Because Mike Rogers, Republican from Alabama, who will likely succeed Representative Adam Smith as chair of the House Armed Services Committee, he's a big-time hawk. He wants to increase defense spending even more, much higher than it is. And as Connor points out, he's also received over $400,000 from arms makers in this cycle, making him the single largest recipient of defense industry campaign donations. And go to the next one. He'll be replacing his predecessor, who only got $300,000 from the military contractors. So this is big, big money. It goes to both parties in about equal way, and that's what purchases our foreign policy. Our foreign policy is for sale, and these are the ones that are taking the cash to keep it going.
You know, early on, even in World War II, as late as World War II, people didn't ask the same questions because the war was a little more real, and they were still able to produce an atmosphere that if you don't support this, you're unpatriotic. It still exists. They use that. But I think, though, the people who lean toward wanting to present their case for peace and the Constitution, that they're going to get less grief over this, because I've been on the receiving end. I haven't been in Congress and elsewhere. Once you talk about this, you don't care about the troops, you don't care about freedom, you don't care about America, and they say that, well, what we have to do is we have to protect the world because that's how we provide peace and security for us. No, it provides welfare benefits, welfare in the sense that the people who make all this money and make all these weapons and a lot of extra stuff besides just the money and the weaponry, because they have a lot of other assets that they pass around, and the budget. The budget could be balanced if you just were willing to do away with militarism. Yeah. And the one thing that I don't like to call it is defense spending.
Yeah, that's for sure. And now that we're out of weapons because we gave them all to Ukraine, now they're going to be celebrating because we have to buy a bunch more. So it's always a windfall for these people. Put up this next clip. This is from the same article, and this just tells you what we're talking about. This is money talks is an old saying, and it's absolutely true. And those campaign investments are just the tip of the iceberg. According to Open Secrets, defense contractors have already spent more than $100 million on lobbying efforts in just the first 3 quarters of 2022, and that number will only continue to rise as arms makers make their final push to increase next year's defense budget. This is the real corruption in Washington. The arms dealers are rich because of our tax dollars that go to supplement them. They use that money to lobby, and they lobby very aggressively, as you know, throughout Washington on both parties. They are not partisan at all. And that in turn, this $100 million that they spend lobbying, how many hundreds of billions do they get in return? It's a great Ponzi scheme.
You know, I find one item in here is the biggest joke ever. And they put this in there. They're either really not all that smart, or they don't want to be smart enough to let the people know what's going on. And this comes from Mike Rogers. He's smart enough to get very rich and, be a powerful person. But he was explaining why he's pushing for more money. We have to push to increase the defense spend purportedly because of historically high inflation rates. So because the cost of the weapons are going up, you have to keep spending more money. He doesn't ask, well, why are the costs of weapons going up? And why is the cost of living going up? So it's just a reflection of how the monetary system is always important, and no matter what we do, in the area of personal liberty, whether it's the welfare state at home or the welfare state overseas and the warfare state, all these things. That is why, of course, protecting honest money is a very important issue.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Paul, with wars and rumors of wars, it's a good reason to take care of security at home. And one great way to do that is through our friends at 4patriots.com, who are now sponsors of this program. 4patriots.com, they sell food that will survive for 25 years. They also sell a lot of other things, power and solar, RV and camping, home and garden. all sorts of things that you can purchase to look out for your family, to provide for your family. It's a great company, family owned in the USA. Let's look at that next clip now. You can see the food, the survival food is delicious. You boil, simmer, and serve. Just add water. It's extremely easy to do. Right now, go to 4Patriots, the number 4Patriots.com, and enter in the code RON, R-O-N, for 10% off of your offer. Free shipping for any order over $97. Put on that next clip. You can see this is some of their new arrivals here that you can find: solar generators, everything that you need to survive for what might happen. And Dr. Paul, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how bad things are going to get. So again, 4Patriots, the number 4Patriots.com. Use the code RON, R-O-N, to get that discount. Dr. Paul?
You know, I want to go back to some of this funding on, the military-industrial complex. DeLauro is progressive.
Oh, yeah.
But she progressively gets worse. She progressively spends more money. But you can't. We can't cure their problems because she has always voted for the F-35.
Oh yeah.
And she still says I'm a progressive. So we're allowed to challenge that because that's a little bit over the top.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Well, the next one we want to look at is complex. But we really had a bombshell yesterday, and that was a New York Times article, and this is a result of some of these January 6 trials. And let's go ahead and put that next one up. This is New York Times. Informant likely to testify as defense witness in Oath Keeper sedition trial. A man who served as number 2 to Stuart Rhodes, the group's leader, is said to have secretly reported to the FBI in the months leading up to the January 6th attack. So this is the first evidence that we've seen, because they didn't want to release any information. Everything was so heavily redacted that the FBI had infiltrated and embedded into the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys group for months and months. It raises a huge number of questions as to what the FBI was involved in doing. How much did they push it? How much, as they did during the entire war on terror, they would infiltrate these groups and they would push them to go do a terror attack and then stop it at the last minute. Well, this time they didn't, so huge questions raised.
We've known about the FBI, and it's been out there in the public, but it doesn't seem to have swayed a lot of people in the election. But who knows what the exact reason is for that. But they always have to have an enemy for the people to roll over and go along with and not fight with it. But if people have a lot of wealth and they're not anticipating that their prices are going to soar, they go along with it, not worrying about the principle of the thing. But we have a lot of foreign enemies, and we always have that, and that's been around for a long time, and that continues. Otherwise, we wouldn't have. As soon as we sort of settle one country and we firmly put them into the empire, then we have to go find somebody else to fight. So that goes on. And of course, we've been to Libya in the recent years, and then Syria, and then Ukraine, and it just goes on and on. But at home, we have to have an enemy and a war going on, and the big war, of course, occurred with COVID, and the power, the power of the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, somebody I think said, and I have to check, that they may be competing with the military-industrial complex on the benefits that they get. So that is it. But then the other one that we're talking about right now is the whole issue of the war on our judicial system.
Yeah.
The FBI. I mean, I just do not believe that there can be a legitimate constitutional or necessary reason that we have to fund the FBI as is drawn up. It is just just a real menace to us. And now information are coming out. You'd think this would be top news. We have a corrupt police force, a federal police force, which we shouldn't have, and they're corrupt to no end. And they infiltrate. They cause, they get involved in promoting and causing and encouraging people to break the law, and then they set them up, and then they arrest them, put them in prison, and they can't even get a day in court. It's a bad system, and I don't know when the American people will wake up from this, but we need to the whole principle of personal liberty and living within the law and living within the rules is a big deal. And right now, we need some help in a very serious manner.
And I think you're right, Dr. Paul. This really raises some big issues of corruption because FBI Director Christopher Wray, his big thing has been the real danger is the danger at home, the rise of right-wing extremists, of white supremacists, et cetera, et cetera. So all the while he's warning of the rise of these people, he's infiltrating his people, his FBI agents, into these groups to encourage them to be more violent, perhaps. They're certainly not encouraging them to calm down. So he's actually creating this problem so that he can go ahead and say, well, look, we've got this problem that we helped create. So it's very disturbing. Let's look at this next clip. This is from the New York Times, from that article, the blockbuster article from yesterday. An FBI informant who was embedded for months in the inner circle of Stewart Rhodes, the leader of the Oath Keepers, is likely to testify as a defense witness in the seditious conspiracy trial of Mr. Rhodes. So let's go to Julie Kelly, who I think is really one of the last of the great journalists. She has been so dogged on this case. It's just incredible, and she just deserves all the kudos in the world for not backing down. She's got a couple of tweets about this revelation. She says, January 6th gets closer and closer to the Whitmer Fednapping. Now remember, this whole Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping issue up there in Michigan was a total fake. Everyone involved was the FBI. It was like FBI, like that meme. So go ahead and put that back on. So she's saying this is looking more and more like the fake kidnapping of Whitmer. And she says, at least 8 FBI informants embedded in Proud Boys before January 6th. If they weren't collecting intel about January 6th, what were they doing? And that is a good question. Now, here's a couple of other tweets from Julie. That's this morning because there was a hearing in the Department of Homeland Security this morning about this, and Christopher Wray is up on the stand. And she says, breaking, Chris Wray, when asked twice, would not say whether the FBI agents and informants dressed like Trump supporters were inside the Capitol before the doors were opened on January 6th. Now, that's a big issue. And then she says, major kudos to Representative Clay Higgins for confronting Wray on the use of informants on January 6th. This was an easy no from Wray, and Thompson, the alleged truth finder of January 6th, tried to cut off Higgins' question. And there's one more from the hearing today, if we can look at this next one that Julie tweeted out. She said, whoo boy, Representative Higgins to Wray. Top threat to Americans' freedoms is a weaponization of the FBI against the citizens you are sworn to serve. Now asking Wray about FBI informants on January 6th. Holy moly, she said, did you have FBI informants dressed as Trump supporters inside? He refused to comment on whether the FBI had people dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol doing who knows what to egg people on. Big news.
Yeah, but the Congress wanted to straighten this all out because then they had some hearings.
Yeah.
One-sided hearing.
Yeah.
You couldn't look at the videos and you couldn't quiz people and get some of this information. It's starting to come out. And I was reading a little bit the other day about LBJ and his criminality in getting elected back in 1948. And it took quite a few years, but it finally turned out the whole thing was cheating and lying, to get him eventually into the presidency. But January 6th, I do not believe that there would have been even an issue without the infiltrators.
Yeah.
That's my personal opinion because I think there were people there. I bet you 90-some% of them were curiosity seekers.
Yeah.
And it's an insurrection. Well, what did the Proud Boys do and the others who are really upset with this? What did they do with their guns? Did they go out and load them?
Yeah.
No, they parked them someplace where they had no access to it. And yet, what they do is when you hear the noise about labeling charges, just like all of the election in 16, and the Russiagate, and all the charges that was incessant over and over and over again was all based on lies. And who was doing it? I've decided that the more you hear the charges from one group about another one, what you should look for is they're tipping you off. because they're the ones who are guilty.
Yeah.
If they're guilty of something, they want to distract. I am convinced that's their strategy. You just turn it around and blame them, and then you have the support of the media, and even the social media will come through a lot of times too.
Yeah.
And they just build on this, and reversing that and digging out the truth is not easy. And then they can turn it into hatred toward one individual, and that'll explain everything. But truth comes out, and sometimes it takes a while. I'm sort of waiting, but I'm encouraging it.
Yeah, a little bit. It trickles out. But, you know, the FBI needed this narrative that it was an insurrection because they needed to have an internal enemy to justify continuing to expand their surveillance and attacks against Americans at home. Similarly, the Democratic Party needed this to be an insurrection because that enabled them to go after Trump and anyone who supported Trump, because for some reason they're obsessed with him. They can't get him off their mind, so they needed to have this kind of bogeyman that they could use over and over, and it served them both pretty well. But as you say, slightly optimistic, hopefully that the truth will trickle out. Well, if we're ready to move on.
I want to make one more mention of this, because you know, the news or what they're saying is usually opposite of what's really going on.
For sure.
And you know, they're great Democrats. They're for pure democracy. They want the people's voices to be heard, which is, you know, a little bit of baloney. But the democracy they have is right now, the whole effort, 99% of everything I hear on TV is the prevention and the making sure that a certain individual cannot even run for an office.
Yeah.
And they're spending all that time on it. If he's so bad and the American people don't want him, you know, why should you cancel the principle of letting somebody run for office?
Yeah.
And you know, then they do it in the name of democracy, so that's a double whammy for them, because they don't know what democracy is anyway. But what they do is they turn it around and make it worse. They give a worse definition rather than looking for a representative republic.
Well, you know, Biden was warning the days before the election, our democracy is in danger. And then as soon as they won, well, democracy did pretty well yesterday. So, well, let's move on to our last little piece today. And this is something from a few days ago in the American Conservative, but it's worth looking at. It's a great article, and it's by the editor of Contact Magazine, which I highly recommend. It's a very interesting publication. Whatever happened to the anti-war left in the American Conservative? And if you go to the next clip, this is the opening. And he makes this, and you and I were both thinking, wow, this brought back a lot of memories. On February 15th, 2003, 14 million people poured into the streets of 800 cities worldwide to oppose the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq. It was a preemptive response to the preemptive war hatched by the Bush administration, and according to the Guinness Book of World Records, the largest protest ever in human history. Yet the 2003 protest was also a swan song of sorts. Sohrab writes, the moment that gave rise is now all but defunct, namely the anti-war left. And I can say from personal experience, Dr. Paul, I remember that day very well, because I was out in the streets of Washington, D.C. with my colleague at the time in your office, Norm Singleton, and my 3-year-old son. He just turned 3 on that day. We were out there freezing cold, protesting the war, and we knew how big it was, how massive it was. And that's when the left and right came together to oppose the war, and there were a lot of people on the right there.
You know, we quite frequently try to mention about the technical differences between a republic and, you know, a democracy. So when these people come out to demonstrate, I would put that in a category of a positive type of democracy. They had enough freedom left that they were allowed to do it. That isn't always the case, and there were people punished when they came out and demonstrated over COVID. I mean, they got to the point where they wouldn't allow this. Oh, you're going to spread diseases and like that, and you can't do that. But I think, you know, in economics, when people have freedom of choice in economic policy, it's a democratic choice they make. But in these demonstrations, when I look at that, you know, if anybody had one iota of a conscience to say, well, what are the people telling us? And And that means sometimes people will take and make an estimate. You know, for every 100 people that show up to one of these rallies, there might be 1,000 people who are saying the same thing. So, you know, technically there were a lot more people who were opposing it. Even now, when I look back at that and think about it, I don't think I comprehended the size of it. I knew what they were getting ready to do was wicked, and I had a responsibility to point it out, because the size is a big deal, but just the effort and the principle of the way we go to war under executive orders and spending money by printing it, those are the kind of things that people just have to wake up for. And out of necessity, they will, because this cannot continue. Nobody's been able to maintain an empire. They attempt to do it when empires get too big and unwielding. Then they have to change their tune, and all of a sudden the empire shrinks. The British Empire was pretty big one time, and then it finally crashed after World War I when they ran out of money.
Yeah. Well, my notes were wrong. It's Sohrab Ahmari, and he's the editor of Compact magazine, and he wrote in this, and it's highly worth looking at. But he was looking at, so why is it that the anti-war left has disintegrated? Why are the progressives now also part of the war party? And he comes across three explanations. I think they're pretty good. The first one, he says, is the shifting nature of the American way of war. We've had this rise of like the shift toward liberal wars. We're fighting a war for your own good. We're going to give you democracy, good and hard, whether you want it or not. And also he points out that it's fought largely by proxies, so therefore it's more palatable. It's not our men and women out there killing and dying. It's those Ukrainians, and they're doing it for their freedom. So keep going. And that's the first one. The other point that he makes is the cultural left has conquest over the security apparatus of the United States, and that's a big important thing. You have the CIA running woke ads, trying to get transgender. I don't know what they do over there. They've got the army, the military. They've gone very, very woke, and I think it's attracted a lot of the left to these institutions. And you remember how the left fell in love with the CIA when the CIA was going after Trump. So they have definitely done that. And the third is the recasting of non-Western powers as reactionary forces to be crushed by the U.S., and that's how he put it. And that's an important one that needs more exploration, because that is this sort of the new USSR mentality in the U.S., which is that the rest of the world must be just like us. There is only one system that works. There is an end of history, and we are it. And if you dare not push a lot of the values that we claim to support, and Sohrab points out the things they do that make them so repressive, impose modesty on women, restrict reproductive freedom, limit LGBTQ representation, et cetera, et cetera. Those are the things we fight for. Any country that goes against us on this, we will undermine and try to destroy. So that has a kind of a progressive appeal. So it's a very good article. It's definitely worth reading.
You know, the one thing that they use, if they didn't have it, they couldn't have their way at all. And that is, they have no compunction to lie through their teeth constantly. The bigger the lie, and the more often it is said, the more people will accept it. But no, those points he makes, what are they doing? And asking, these are our opinion, and therefore we live in a democracy. We're going to have a little debate here. That's the last thing they want.
Yeah.
And the last thing they want to see are a lot of people out there. The more, believe it or not, there are more authoritarian governments than ours, and ours is getting pretty bad. But if you're in China, you might not be treated with gentle hands, you know, if you're out demonstrating. And but I think there are episodes where, when you look at the ruthlessness on how that January 6th thing occurred, how people were set up and then they were denied justice, that's getting pretty bad. It might be a little more sophisticated than rolling into tanks and just killing people. You know, that literally happened during the Vietnam War at Kent State. You know, the demonstrators, you know, were, you know, some of them were killed. So it's a system that I think if we could ban lying, I guess it would be all right. But of course, that's a personal matter, and someday that maybe there'll be less layers. And I think in our history there were times when people were more honorable, but I think people live with the lies now. I think that purity and telling the truth, the last place you find them not for all of them, because we have a few there, is going into Washington. And I'm sure that's still true in some of the agencies that we don't like. I don't think you can say anybody who's ever been in the FBI, is part of this. But I think nowadays it's sort of like the military. There were times when it was an absolute automatic partisan thing and a political thing to volunteer and fight for your country. But today, less people are wanting to go into the military, and I imagine there's going to be less people wanting to go into the FBI. And heck, you don't even know what the people are thinking about the CIA and why they'd want to go in there. The CIA it's part of the coup. The CIA is not controlled or understood or regulated by our president.
Yeah.
I mean, it is totally out of control. And of course, this is a little bit off the subject, but I think that is exactly what happened all the way back into 1963 with the Kennedy thing. It was out of control, and the government turning against their own government and killing them.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Dr. Paul, I do want to thank our viewers for watching the show today. We're glad to be back on live streaming. Here's a couple ways you can help the Ron Paul Liberty Report without spending a single penny. You can go to our Rumble page right now, and you can hit like for the Rumbles. You can make sure you're subscribed. You can also go to ronpaulinstitute.org and click on subscribe and subscribe to updates so we can keep in touch. Just in case, you never know what will happen. Again, we never rent, sell, lend out your names to anyone. They're only for us to communicate with you, and I guarantee that. I will put a link here in the description where you can sign up for free and get our updates. And we don't do it every day. We don't bug you every day, but occasionally we'll put something out for you. We actually send out Dr. Paul's column to you directly so you get it right in your inbox and other things. So, Dr. Paul?
Very good. I want to close by mentioning once again this whole issue of bipartisanship. Bipartisanship, of course, is said to be used to bring people together and get good things passed. And of course, that doesn't happen that way. And the people still like that idea. But bipartisanship is something you can work for, but it's bringing people together. And because we can't all agree on everything there are, but there are issues that we can agree on. And I would think the war issue is one that they could agree on. And I also happen to believe that if people had the information and not the education to get from the government schools, they would understand the importance of having sound money so that you don't have fraudulent money and you don't have counterfeit, which falsely, rewards people for working until it all comes apart. So I really believe there's going to be an opportunity, and it's rising all the time. Even from this, it just means that, of course, one thing that could be worse if there is, no competition at all. The competition in Washington is not over. Should we have a Federal Reserve or not? The competition is personal. And did you steal more money than I stole? Oh no, I'm going to compete with you, and I'm going to get my friends in here so we can manipulate the power and the money. But policy, the argument isn't there yet. Hopefully Daniel pointed out a few points, a few people that are going to be better, and we knew some others. But that is very important, because people will respond if they can get the message out. Our job is to help get that message out, because when the people have the truth, I believe they will lean toward defending the principles of liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.